The mail-order woman. The letter had promised children who needed a mother, not two barefoot boys standing in the dirt with eyes that had already seen too much. Sarah Brennan stepped down from the stagecoach into the Wyoming dust, her worn traveling dress clinging to her legs, and faced the pair of them like they were a firing squad. The taller one, maybe 9 years old, crossed his arms. The smaller one just stared, his bottom lip trembling like he was deciding whether to cry or run. "You're the mail-order woman?" the taller boy asked. Sarah set her single carpet bag on the ground and wiped her palms on her skirt. The question hung in the air between them, sharp as a challenge. She'd expected a man at the station, the rancher himself, Cole Hartley, who'd written 3 careful letters over 4 months before she'd finally agreed to come west. What she hadn't expected was this: 2 children standing alone beside a buckboard wagon, reins loose in the dirt, looking at her like she was something the wind had blown in that they'd have to sweep back out. "I'm Sarah Brennan," she said, keeping her voice steady, "and yes, I suppose I am." The smaller boy uncrossed his arms then, his face softening just a fraction. "Pa said you might not come. He said women change their minds." Something in Sarah's chest pulled tight. She crouched down so she was eye level with them both, her knees pressing into the dusty main street of a town she didn't even know the name of yet. Up close, she could see the tear in the younger one's shirt collar, the way the older boy's hair had been cut crooked, probably by his own hand. "Well, I'm here," she said, "and I don't plan on changing my mind." The older boy studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, like he was marking her words down somewhere important. "I'm Jesse. That's my brother Thomas. He's 6. I'm 9. It's nice to meet you both." Thomas stepped forward then, his small hand reaching out to touch the fabric of her sleeve. "You smell like flowers," he said quietly. Jesse shot him a look. "Tommy, don't be weird." But Sarah smiled, the first real smile since she'd left Ohio 3 weeks ago. "It's lavender soap. My mother made it." "Our ma used to smell like bread," Thomas said. Then his face went tight, like he'd said something wrong. Sarah's throat ached. She knew from Cole's second letter that the boy's mother had died 2 winters back, that he'd been managing alone ever since. The letters had been practical, almost businesslike, but she'd read between the lines: a man drowning slowly, trying to raise 2 sons and run a cattle ranch without letting either one fall apart. Jessie picked up her carpet bag without asking and started toward the wagon. "Pa's back at the ranch. He sent us to fetch you, said he couldn't leave the herd." Sarah followed, her boots kicking up small clouds with each step. The town behind them was small, a mercantile, a saloon, a church with peeling white paint. Laundry hung between buildings, and somewhere a dog barked. It was nothing like Cincinnati, where she'd spent the last 4 years working in a boarding house kitchen, saving every penny, watching her own dreams shrink down to the size of a single room and a life that felt like holding her breath underwater. The wagon creaked as she climbed up beside Jesse, who took the reins with the confidence of someone much older. Thomas wedged himself between them, his thin shoulder pressing against her side. "How far is the ranch?" Sarah asked. 5 miles, Jesse said. He clicked his tongue and the horses started forward. "It's not fancy," Pa said to tell you that. "I wasn't expecting fancy." Thomas looked up at her. "Do you know how to cook?" "I do." "Good." Jesse burns everything. Jesse's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. They rode in silence for a while, the town falling away behind them until there was nothing but open land, rolling hills covered in dry grass, the sky so wide it felt like it might swallow them whole. Sarah had never seen so much space in her life. It should have felt freeing, but instead it felt exposing, like there was nowhere to hide from whatever was coming. "Pa's gonna like you," Thomas said after a while. "How do you know?" "Because you came," he said simply. "Nobody else did." Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. She wanted to ask what he meant, but Jesse cut in before she could. "There was another woman before you," he said, his voice flat. "Last spring, she took one look at the place and got back on the stagecoach the same day." "I see." Pa was real quiet after that, for a long time. Sarah didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The wagon rattled over ruts in the road, and the sun beat down on her shoulders. She could feel sweat gathering at the back of her neck, but she didn't mind. Heat was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. When the ranch finally came into view, her breath caught. It wasn't much: a low house with a sagging porch, a barn that needed paint, a corral with a few horses standing in the shade. But beyond it, stretching out toward the horizon, was land, miles and miles of it, and in the distance she could see cattle moving slow as clouds. A man stood by the corral fence, his back to them. Even from a distance, Sarah could tell he was tall, broad-shouldered, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He didn't turn when the wagon approached, and something about that, the way he kept his back to her, like he was bracing himself, made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down. "Pa, we got her." Thomas climbed down next, then turned to offer Sarah his hand like a little gentleman. She took it, stepping into the dirt, and finally the man by the fence turned around. Cole Hartley had a face that had been weathered by sun and hardship, lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many horizons. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and his eyes, when they finally met hers, were the color of summer thunderstorms. He looked at her for a long moment, and she looked back, neither of them saying anything. "Miss Brennan," he said finally, his voice rough. "Mr. Hartley." He took off his hat, turned it in his hands. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I'm here." The words felt significant somehow, bigger than they should. Jesse and Thomas stood between them like referees, their heads swiveling back and forth. Cole cleared his throat. "Boys, show Miss Brennan to the spare room. Let her get settled." "Yes, sir," Jesse said. But Thomas grabbed Sarah's hand first, his small fingers wrapping around hers. "Come on, I'll show you where everything is." She let him lead her toward the house, but she looked back once. Cole was watching her, his expression unreadable, and when their eyes met again, something passed between them, recognition maybe. Or just the shared understanding of two people who'd both gambled everything on a single decision. The house was small but clean, which surprised her. The spare room had a narrow bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the eastern pasture. Thomas sat on the bed while Sarah unpacked her few belongings, chattering about the ranch, how many cattle they had, which horses were the fastest, where the creek ran cold even in summer. "Do you got a husband back home?" he asked suddenly. Sarah folded a dress carefully before answering, "No." "Did you ever?" "Thomas," Jesse said from the doorway, "that's not polite." But Sarah shook her head. "It's all right." She sat down on the bed beside Thomas. "I was engaged once, a long time ago, but he died before we could marry." Thomas's eyes went wide. "How'd he die?" "Fever." "That's how Ma died too," he said quietly. "She got real sick, and then one day she just didn't wake up." Jesse shifted in the doorway, his face tight. Sarah wanted to reach for him, but she didn't know if she had the right yet. "I'm sorry," she said instead, "for both of you." "Pa says sorry don't change nothing," Jesse said. "He says you just gotta keep going." "Your pa sounds like a wise man." Jesse's expression softened just a fraction. He's just tired a lot." Sarah understood that. She'd seen it in Cole's eyes, that bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. That night she cooked supper for the first time. The kitchen was basic but functional, and she found dried beans, salt pork, and some wrinkled potatoes in the root cellar. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. When she called them to the table, all three of them, Cole and his sons, sat down with the careful movements of people who weren't used to this, to someone taking care of them. Cole said grace, his voice low and steady, and then they ate in near silence. Sarah watched them from the corner of her eye, the way Jesse cut Thomas's meat without being asked, the way Cole's hands, scarred and rough, held his fork like he was afraid it might break, the way Thomas kept sneaking glances at her like he was making sure she was still real. "This is good," Cole said finally. "Thank you." "You're welcome." More silence, Then Thomas piped up, "Are you gonna stay forever?" Cole's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Jessie went still. Sarah felt all their eyes on her, waiting. "I'm going to stay as long as you'll have me," she said carefully. Thomas grinned, Jessie relaxed. But Cole just nodded once and went back to eating, and Sarah couldn't tell if he was relieved or terrified. The days fell into a rhythm. Sarah woke before dawn to start breakfast, then packed lunches for Cole and Jessie, who worked the ranch together. Thomas stayed close to her at first, helping with chores, showing her where things were kept. He talked constantly, filling the silence with stories about his mother, about the ranch, about a calf he'd helped birth last spring that he'd named Patches. "She's still alive," he told Sarah proudly, leading her to the barn. "Wanna see her?" The barn smelled like hay and animal warmth. Patches was a young heifer with a white patch over one eye, and she came right up to Thomas when he called, nosing at his pockets for treats. "She's beautiful," Sarah said. "Pa says I can keep her as long as I take care of her, so I do, every single day." There was such fierce determination in his voice that Sarah's throat ached. "You're doing a fine job." Over the next 2 weeks, she learned the patterns of the place. Cole left before sunrise and often didn't come back until after dark, his clothes covered in dust and sometimes blood from dealing with stubborn cattle or mending fences. Jessie worked alongside him, trying so hard to be a man that it broke Sarah's heart. And Thomas just wanted someone to notice him, to listen to his stories, to tuck him in at night. She started doing that, tucking him in. The first time he looked surprised. The second time he asked her to stay until he fell asleep. By the end of the week, it was routine, and she found herself looking forward to those quiet moments, sitting on the edge of his bed, listening to him talk about his day until his words got slow and sleepy. One night, as she was leaving his room, she nearly ran into Cole in the hallway. He stepped back quickly, like he'd been caught at something. "Sorry," he said, "I was just—" "It's all right." They stood there in the dim light from Thomas's room, close enough that she could smell the day on him, sweat and leather, and something earthy. His eyes searched her face like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. "You're good with them," he said finally, "better than I expected." "They're good boys." "They are," he rubbed the back of his neck. "I should have said this sooner, but thank you for coming, for staying." Sarah's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You don't have to thank me." "Yeah, I do." He turned to go, but she called after him softly, "Cole." He stopped, looked back. "You're doing a good job too, with them. I can see that." Something crossed his face then, relief maybe, or gratitude, or just exhaustion finally acknowledged. He nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness of his own room, and Sarah stood there in the hallway for a long time, listening to the house settle around her. The turning point came on a Sunday. The Caldwell Ranch was 5 miles south, and Martha Caldwell had sent word through Jessie that Sarah was expected for Sunday lunch. "All the women go," Jessie had explained awkwardly. "It's sort of a thing." Sarah didn't want to go, but Cole had insisted. "They'll talk if you don't," he'd said, "and I don't want them talking." So she'd put on her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and let Jessie drive her over in the wagon. Martha Caldwell's house was nicer than Cole's, with actual curtains in the windows and a porch that didn't sag. 6 other women were already there, perched in the parlor like birds on a wire, all of them turning to look when Sarah walked in. Martha, a stout woman with graying hair, stood to greet her. "Sarah Brennan, we've been dying to meet you." "It's nice to meet you all too." But the way they looked at her, assessing, judging, made her skin prickle. She sat down in the offered chair and accepted a cup of tea she didn't want. So a younger woman with sharp eyes said, "A mail-order bride, how modern." There was something mean in her tone. Sarah held her cup steady. "I prefer to think of it as practical." "Practical," the woman repeated, like she was testing the word. "Is that what we are calling it?" Martha shot her a look. "Hush, Claire, don't be rude." She turned back to Sarah. "You'll have to forgive us. We don't get much excitement out here. The last woman Cole tried to bring in didn't last a day." "So I heard." She said the place was too rough. Another woman chimed in. That coal was too hard. Sarah set her teacup down carefully. Cole Hartley is raising 2 boys alone while running a ranch. I don't think hard is the right word. I think strong is more accurate. The room went quiet. Claire leaned forward, her eyes glittering. You sound awfully defensive of a man you barely know. I know enough. Do you? Claire smiled, but it wasn't kind. Do you know about the debts, about how close he is to losing everything? Sarah's blood went cold. What? Martha sighed. Claire, that's enough. But Claire was on a roll now. Didn't he tell you? The ranch is mortgaged to the hilt, has been since his wife died. One bad season and the bank will take it all. Is that why he needed a wife so badly? Someone to help him hold on to what's left. Sarah stood up, her legs shaking. I think I should go. Sit down, dear, Martha said, her voice gentler. Claire's just being spiteful, but she's not entirely wrong. Cole's situation is difficult, and you should know what you're walking into. Sarah sat, but barely. Her mind was racing. Cole hadn't mentioned debts, hadn't mentioned anything about money troubles. The letters had been about the boys, about needing help, about. She stopped, thought back. Had he actually said he was financially secure, or had she just assumed? How bad is it? She asked quietly. Martha exchanged glances with the other women. Bad enough that people are taking bets on whether he'll make it through next winter. He's a proud man, Sarah, too proud to ask for help, too proud to admit when he's drowning. Sarah stood again, and this time no one stopped her. Thank you for the tea. She walked out into the bright afternoon, her chest tight with anger and something else, fear maybe, or just the sharp sting of betrayal. Jesse was waiting by the wagon, and he took one look at her face and didn't ask questions, just drove her home in silence. Cole was in the barn when they got back, and Sarah went straight there, her boots pounding the dirt. He looked up when she came in, surprise flickering across his face. Sarah, I thought you'd be gone for. Why didn't you tell me? She demanded. His expression closed off. Tell you what? About the debts, about the ranch, about the fact that you might lose everything. He set down the harness he'd been mending. Who told you that? Does it matter? It does to me. Claire Thornton, at Martha Caldwell's house. Cole cursed under his breath. Claire's got a big mouth and a small heart. You shouldn't listen to her. So it's not true. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he said it. It's true. Sarah felt like the ground had shifted under her feet. Why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't have come. The honesty of it hit her like a slap. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. So you lied to me. I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, Cole. Is it? His voice rose. Was I supposed to put it in the letters? Dear Sarah, I'm desperate and broke, and one bad winter away from losing my family's land, but please come marry me anyway. Would that have worked? At least it would have been honest. Honesty doesn't change anything. He was shouting now, and she realized she'd never heard him raise his voice before. I need help. The boys need a mother. Those are facts. Whether I'm rich or poor doesn't change that. It changes everything, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Because now I don't know if you wanted me or just needed a pair of hands to help you hold on. The look on his face, raw and wounded, made her chest ache, but she didn't take the words back. She turned and walked out of the barn, out into the sunlight, and kept walking until she reached the creek Thomas had told her about. She sat down on the bank and let herself cry. She didn't go back to the house until dark. When she did, Cole was sitting on the porch, his head in his hands. He looked up when her footsteps sounded on the steps. Are you leaving? He asked quietly. Sarah sat down beside him, leaving space between them. I don't know. I'd understand if you did. Would you? He laughed, but it was a bitter sound. No, but I'd let you go. I wouldn't keep you here if you didn't want to be. They sat in silence for a while. Sarah could hear crickets singing in the grass, the distant sound of cattle lowing. Tell me the truth, she said finally, all of it. So he did. He told her about the drought 2 years back that had killed half his herd, about the debts he'd taken on to rebuild, thinking he could manage, about the bank payments that kept coming due, getting harder and harder to meet, about the fact that if he couldn't make the next payment in 3 months, he'd lose the ranch, the land his father had built, the only home his sons had ever known. I'm not looking for pity, he said when he was done, and I'm not asking you to save me, but yes, I need help. I need someone who can take care of the boys while Jesse and I work every daylight hour trying to keep this place afloat. I need someone who won't break when things get hard. And when you wrote back to me, when you said you'd come, I thought maybe God was giving me one last chance. Sarah wiped her eyes. You should have told me. I know. I deserved to know what I was walking into. I know. She looked at him then, really looked at him. At the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the way his shoulders sagged like he was carrying the weight of the world. And she thought about Jesse and Thomas, about the way they looked at her like she was something precious, something they'd been waiting for. I'm not leaving, she said. Cole's head jerked up. What? I said I'm not leaving. I'm angry and I'm hurt, but I'm not leaving. Sarah. But you have to promise me something. No more secrets. If things get worse, you tell me. If you need help, you ask for it. We are in this together now, or we are not in it at all. He stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then slowly he nodded. Together. Together, she repeated. He held out his hand, and after a moment she took it. His palm was rough and warm, and when his fingers closed around hers, something in her chest settled, like a key turning in a lock. The next 3 months were the hardest of Sarah's life. She worked from before dawn until after dark, cooking, cleaning, mending, keeping the house and the boys going, while Cole and Jesse pushed themselves to the breaking point outside. They sold off cattle early, took on extra work for neighboring ranches, scraped together every penny they could. Sarah started selling her baking in town, pies and bread that Martha Caldwell grudgingly admitted were the best she'd ever tasted. The money wasn't much, but it helped. Every dollar counted. The boys felt the tension. Thomas got quieter, his smiles less frequent. Jesse worked himself ragged, trying to be the man he thought his father needed. And Cole barely slept, barely ate, wearing himself down to the bone. One night, Sarah found him sitting at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, his head in his hands. She sat down across from him without saying anything. I'm going to lose it, he said quietly. Even with everything we're doing, it's not going to be enough. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Then we'll figure out what comes next. He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. How are you so calm? Because falling apart won't help anyone. I've put you through hell and you're still here. Why? Sarah thought about it, about the boys who'd started calling her Miss Sarah with something like hope in their voices, about the way Thomas had crawled into her lap last week when he'd skinned his knee, about how Jesse had started asking her advice about things he was too proud to ask his father, about the way Cole looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was an anchor in a storm. Because this is where I belong, she said simply. Cole's hand tightened around hers. Sarah. I mean it. I didn't know what I was looking for when I came here, but I found it. I found you and the boys and this place, and I'm not giving up on any of it. Even if we lose the ranch. Even then, we'll figure it out together. That's what families do. Something broke in his face then. He stood up, pulled her to her feet, and before she could think or breathe or protest, he kissed her. It was desperate and grateful and full of everything neither of them had been able to say. Sarah kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for just a moment the world fell away and there was only this, only them. When they finally broke apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. Probably not, she said, and he laughed, actually laughed, for the first time since she'd known him. The money came through 3 days before the payment was due. Cole had gone to town to meet with the bank to beg for an extension, and he came back riding fast, his face transformed. Sarah ran out to meet him, her heart in her throat. "What happened?" He swung down from the horse, grabbed her around the waist, and lifted her clean off the ground. "The army contract came through, the one I applied for months ago, supplying beef to Fort Bridger. They approved it. It's enough, Sarah. It's enough to pay off the bank and get us through to spring." Sarah laughed, or maybe cried, she couldn't tell which. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Jesse and Thomas came running from the barn, and Cole grabbed them both, pulling them into a tangle of arms and relief. They stood there in the yard, holding each other, and Sarah thought, "This is it. This is what I came for." That night, after the boys were asleep, Cole found Sarah on the porch. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I have something to ask you," he said. Sarah's heart kicked. "What?" "Marry me for real this time, not out of necessity or desperation, but because I want you to. Because the boys love you and he started again. "I love you, Sarah. I didn't expect to, didn't think I could again, but I do." Sarah turned to look at him, and she could see her whole future in his face. "Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, for real, forever." He kissed her then, slow and sure, and Sarah kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, he pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "It's not much," he said. "It's perfect." He slid it onto her finger, and it fit like it had been made for her. They married a week later in the little church in town, with Jesse and Thomas standing up beside them and half the county in attendance. Martha Caldwell cried. Even Claire Thornton looked grudgingly pleased. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Cole did, and Thomas whooped loud enough to make everyone laugh. Afterward, standing outside in the autumn sunshine, Thomas grabbed Sarah's hand. "So you're really our ma now." Sarah crouched down to his level. "If you'll have me." "Forever. Forever." Jesse, standing beside his father, looked at Cole. "She's really staying." "She really is," Cole said. Jesse's face, so carefully controlled for so long, crumpled. "Good," he whispered. "Good." Sarah pulled him into a hug, and then Thomas, and then Cole wrapped his arms around all of them, and they stood there like that, a family finally whole, while the wind whispered across the Wyoming plains and the future stretched out before them, uncertain but theirs. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, scared and alone, taking a chance on a life she couldn't imagine. And she thought about the woman she was now, still scared sometimes, but not alone, never alone again. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked softly. Sarah turned to him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I'm thinking that those boys asked me who I was, and I didn't know how to answer. And now I know," she smiled. "I'm the woman who stayed." Cole pulled her close, and Sarah closed her eyes, listening to the sound of her son's breathing in the next room, feeling the steady beat of her husband's heart against hers, and knew, finally, absolutely, that she was home.